Welcome to their best decks rounded for Marvel Snap. This list is a lot more varied and interesting than last week's Eliath-filled roundup. Today I'm going to be covering 13 different deck lists, and only 3 of them contain Marvel Snap's favorite purple fart cloud. Let's go ahead and dive on into the details here, huh? Kicking things off in the popular decks category this week, we have Loki being back on top in terms of the most popular deck in the post-infinite ladder for Marvel Snap. Noteworthy things in our Loki list that we're featuring today is that Werewolf by Night has solidly won out over Elsa Bloodstone as the additional kind of big numbers card of choice in these deck lists past just the Collector. And in order to enable Werewolf by Night, Falcon and in some cases Beast as well are played so they can return their 1 energy and other cheap on revealed cards back to their hand to both trigger the Collector and allow your Werewolf to bounce around the board even more. The tech card slot in these deck lists, in this particular one being represented by Rogue, also sees play as things such as Shang-Chi and occasionally Cosmo, depending on what the deck builder wants to hedge against and how good or bad they want to be inside of the Loki mirror match. Our second most popular deck this week is one I called out as the top performer last week, and that is Zabu Darkhawk. This deck list just has the key cheap disruptive elements in Korg, Rockslide, and Black Widow to make your opponent's deck less consistent, while top-ending powerful 6 energy cards such as Eliath and Doctor Doom that Iron Lad is very powerful to flip into. The kind of core of this deck, though, is definitely the 4 energy ongoing cards. Darkhawk, the deck's namesake, can just provide a massive stat stick and efficient resource cost, and our latest season pass card in Miss Marvel allows this deck to add 15 stats to the board for just 3 or 4 resources. Noteworthy tech card in this particular build is Super Skrull, which is fantastic against opposing Darkhawk decks, while also having minimal downside if a Loki deck grabs it from you, since the Loki deck's not going to have a lot of time to either make your deck bigger or set up their board appropriately for copying your Miss Marvel. You can tell the Marvel Snap format is healing a little bit as Destroy is once again among our most popular decks in the format. Noteworthy things to call out about this particular list that's currently the most popular among them is that they are starting to eschew the copy of Deathlock in order to fit Nico Minaru in, definitely a staple in this archetype moving forward. Also noteworthy is that Taskmaster has been getting played less and less in favor of the more greedy copy of Arnim Zola, which lets you double up your nulls in an impressive way while offering a bit more risk, since you can't always control where X-23 and Wolverine are going to end up at on your board. Moving along to our top performing decks, we actually have one that's being kind of side graded from most popular last week. As the format has developed, these Professor X Eliath decks have shrunk in popularity. I would wager in a response to the fact that they tend to struggle a little bit in both the Loki and Darkhawk matchups. That being said, I think this deck list is still an excellent, what I refer to as pub stomper, because being able to lock out a lot of random things your opponents are doing in different lanes is something that little bit less optimized deck lists or off meta things tend to struggle with, meaning if you're not hitting either of the big 2 in the format, this deck list still remains an excellent choice in my opinion. Our next deck list of the top performers, I gotta be honest, is a little bit of a head scratcher for me. As someone who's a huge fan of Cerebro, from a pure Theorycraft perspective, this deck list doesn't put out consistently big numbers across its lanes. It doesn't really have super meaningful disruption outside of Enchantress, and my personal results with it left a little bit to be desired. That being said, it has impressive stats on Untapped in terms of win rate and average cubes across pretty reasonable sample sizes, so there must be something here that I've not quite seen in the couple dozen of games that I've run it on the ladder. I would love to know in the comments down below if you've had any experience with Cerebro 5. Does it match mine and you kind of struggled to find success, or are you one of the people contributing to the powerful stats that this deck has on the Untapped tracker right now? It's a Shuri deck, still quietly putting up consistent and powerful stats in every Marvel Snap format. Only noteworthy thing this week is that the builds of Shuri, like the one that I'm featuring here today, playing Chavez as opposed to Eliath, are more successful on Untapped in larger sample sizes. I would wager this is a testament to the fact that Shuri really wants to play their deck's namesake on turn 4, and Chavez letting you do that a little bit more frequently is valuable percentage points to have access to. Speaking of the format normalizing a little bit, this stock discard variation is once again putting up a reasonable win rate and high average cube gains on the untapped tracker post infinite. These 12 cards have kind of stabilized as the default build with the most games played and good stats after the recent Hellcow buff. This deck list is really just hyper consistent at what it does now. You have a lot of overlapping pieces where like Morbius and Dakin and Dracula all make big numbers consistently, while Hellcow, Lady Sif, Blade, and MODOK all get your hand empty of the cards that you need to be discarding quite consistently. If you've never played this deck list before, I think it's an excellent one to pick up and play a few games with to at least get familiar with it, because knowing the ins and outs of this deck list will really help you when you're playing against it, knowing what your opponent's power output range is going to be on that final turn of the game. Our third category deck list this week, I'm calling high potential lists. These are all deck lists that have incredible average cube rates, but their sample sizes are definitely on the smaller side. So they could be a deck list that could potentially be the next breakout thing, or even if their stats normalize a little bit as they get more popular, they'll still likely be quite strong. Our first high potential deck list is this Toxic High Evolutionary variation. The Abomination, when evolved, is the key card this deck's kind of built around, getting cheaper for each card on the opponent's side of the board that's inflicted with a penalty. Scorpion, Spider Woman, as well as High Evolutionaries Thing and Cyclops all can reduce the cost of this Abomination. While this deck list is leveraging our latest season pass card, Miss Marvel, as a new addition, which fits pretty well here as just a generically good card in a deck list that has a lot of spread costs anyways, it's noteworthy that Abomination got an indirect upgrade when Shang-Chi was nerfed to now destroy only 10 plus power cards. Rogue is noteworthy as a tech card in this shell because opposing Luke Cage can essentially turn this deck off, so you need to make sure that you have an answer to that in tow if you're looking to play this one. Our next high potential deck list and the last Alioth list we're going to talk about today is this Destroy Lockout deck. So this deck list has Professor X and Alioth to kind of execute that same kind of cheese strategies we saw a bunch of decks playing last week, and it achieves that in this particular list by blowing up X-23 on turn 3 to slam down Professor X on turn 4. This deck list is also leveraging Vision as a flexible card that can move around the board, making your turn 6 Alioth that much more threatening. That being said, the bottom end of this deck is very different than a lot of other lockout decks that we've seen in the past, having this destroy core to play a lot of stats to the board early, making that Professor X a lot more likely to successfully lock you out a lane. Our final high potential deck list this week is a fantastic take on Hela Reanimator that's doing a couple of unique things. First, you'll note that this is not an Invisible Woman MODOK deck trying to full combo. Instead, we have Lockjaw as an alternative enabler that not only helps us find Hela consistently, but can also flip our large power cards out onto the board early. The other thing this deck list is doing is that if you play your cards right, you'll never be at a risk for discarding Hela from your hand. We have Death as an 8 energy card that's guaranteed to be binned by Lady Sif. We have Silver Samurai, who explicitly only discards our lowest power cards, binning things like Jubilee and White Tiger that add a lot of stats when brought back. And we have Blade, whose recent update makes him always discard our rightmost cards, so we're basically never gambling with this deck when it comes to what we're going to be binning. Closing things out in our best decks video, as always, we have a few of my own personal picks that are fun, off-meta things that I've been having success with. Kicking off is Magneto Control. This deck list really feels like it benefited from the recent Shang-Chi nerf to 10 points of power being destroyed. Jessica Jones gets up to 9, and Rescue as well lets us get big stats on the board that are not susceptible to our opponent's disruption. At the bottom end of the curve in this deck, we just have a bunch of good 2 energy cards that allow us to get stats down early, and we have Storm, who can help us mitigate some location variance while also being a path that we're great at contesting thanks to Vision moving around the board or Magneto moving our opponent's cards around that they've deployed there. Finally, in games where Magneto's not good enough to put us over the top, we have powerful tech cards like Shang-Chi and Enchantress that we can deploy alongside a 2-drop like Lizard or Jeff to get the job done. If you want to see this deck in action, be sure to check out yesterday's deck highlight that featured it. I'll link that in the video description down below. My next pocket pick here is the Darkhawk Bounce deck. You could maybe make the argument that this deck's become popular and powerful enough that it could be in one of the other categories, but it's a deck list near and dear to my heart, so I'm hiding it down in my picks here this week, so that way people who don't get this far into the video don't get to know it's fantastic. This deck list is super disruptive with things like Korg and Black Widow, with Falcon and Beast to let us redeploy them, and Werewolf by Night really feels like it took this deck to a whole nother level as an absolutely massive stat stick that's difficult for your opponent to pin down with their tech cards. Speaking of tech cards, one thing that's noteworthy in this Darkhawk bounce list compared to others that I've featured recently is I've swapped my tech card of choice from Armor to Shadow King. This is a response primarily to Alioth being a little bit less popular going into this week, as well as Shadow King being excellent against the Loki decks, knocking down their werewolves or their collector, which have been increasing in popularity again. My final pocket pick and the last deck list we're going to review in this video is this Moon Girl High Evolutionary She-Hulk Double Up deck. This deck list, while it has a smaller sample size on Untapped, actually has some of the highest average cube games of any deck on their post-infinite ladder right now. This deck list is quite strong in my opinion. It does the kind of over-the-top things in the games where Magic creates Limbo, and then you get to play Hulk and She-Hulk on turn 7, but this deck's real strength is the fact that it doesn't need a turn 7 to win. You have really powerful draws where you Moon Girl, create a second She-Hulk on turn 4, you pass on turn 5, soaking energy into your Sunspot, and then you just deploy 2 1 energy 10 power cards and some other stuff that you have lying around in your hand to overwhelm your opponent in a way that's difficult for them to predict. I actually featured a highlight with this deck back before they restored Mobius to his ongoing state, and there were a bunch of silly comments on that video, people being like, oh, can't play this deck anymore once Mobius is back, but as the format has shown, Mobius is essentially nowhere to be seen, and even in the handful of games where you're going to run into that card, you could just do high Evo things with your regular Hulk and kind of let She-Hulk sit by the wayside to great effect. All in all, I'm definitely much happier with the Marvel Snap format this week than I was last week. I was pleasantly surprised when the play rates and win rates and average cubes of Professor X and Alioth kept going down and down and down, and hopefully they continue trending in that manner as those cards steal a lot of joy from me personally. I would love to know what you all have been playing with and against at home. What are you finding success with? What are you struggling against? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, if you enjoyed my music on this topic, be sure to snap that like button and make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss another excellent breakdown like this one.